Once upon a time, the world was ruled by Spain. In the 16th century, the largest and most powerful empire did not belong to Britain, but to Spain. For the first time in history, a single crown ruled a vast empire stretching from Europe to Africa, from the Americas to Asia. Its lands were so extensive that people began to say, "The sun never sets on the Spanish Empire." This phrase would later be adopted by the British. But there was a strange twist to this story. The richest empire the world had ever seen collapsed under the weight of its own treasure. And this story still matters today, because just like Spain, we often mistake sudden inflows of money for real wealth. The crash that follows is always brutal. If you are ready to change your perspective, let's begin. Welcome to Perspective Engine. Don't forget to subscribe. After 1492, when Spain reached the New World, it was as if it had discovered an endless treasure. Gold and silver in quantities unimaginable to Europe began flowing into Spanish hands. In 1521, the conquest of Mexico brought down the Aztec Empire and gave Spain access to the rich mines of Zacatecas. A decade later, the Inca Empire collapsed in Peru, revealing the enormous silver mountain of Piracy. So vast it was called the mountain that eats men. For more than a century, these mines fed treasure fleets crossing the Atlantic. Between 1500 and 1650, Spain imported approximately 180,000 tons of silver and 2,000 tons of gold. The scale was staggering. To put it into perspective, this was more silver than all of Europe had mined in the previous 1,000 years combined. This wealth reshaped not only Europe, but the entire world. From the ports of Seville and Cadiz, ships carried silver to the Mediterranean, northern Europe, and even across the Pacific to Manila, where it was exchanged for Chinese silk and porcelain. This marked the birth of the first truly global economy, with Spain at its center. From today's perspective, the contrast is striking. When Jamestown was founded in 1607, while the first permanent English colony was still struggling to survive in a swamp, Mexico City already had universities, printing presses, and cathedrals. Lima was a developed city. St. Augustine in Florida, founded in 1565, was the first permanent European settlement in what is now the United States. In other words, while Britain and France were still fumbling with colonies, Spain was building global infrastructure. Yet beneath all this grandeur lay a fundamental problem. The empire was hollow at its core. Spain had confused treasure with wealth. It was not circulating capital. The silver was real, but the way it was used turned strength into weakness. Prices rose rapidly. Between 1500 and 1600, inflation spiraled out of control, with prices quadrupling in a single century. While the country sat atop mountains of silver, ordinary people struggled to afford bread and clothing. Money only holds value when it is limited and trusted. When too much money floods an economy, purchasing power collapses. This is also how Rome fell. Let's think about it simply. Imagine a town where bread costs 1 coin. Suddenly 10 times more coins flood the town, but the number of bakers and loaves stays the same. Seeing that people have more money, bakers raise prices. Bread now costs 2, 3, even 4 coins. The bread hasn't changed. The money has lost its value. This was exactly Spain's fate. Economists call this process the price revolution. It was the first major wave of global inflation caused by too much money chasing too few goods, but it didn't affect everyone equally. Nobles, merchants, and bankers who accessed the silver first benefited. Ordinary people living on fixed incomes were crushed. The more silver arrived, the poorer the population felt. What should have been a blessing turned into poison. The mistakes didn't end there. Instead of investing this wealth in production, Spain spent it on imports. Italian merchants, Dutch sailors, and German craftsmen sold luxury goods to Spain and were paid with American silver. Spain did not produce. It consumed. While its rivals reinvested every coin they earned, Spain grew accustomed to waiting for treasure fleets. And then there were the endless wars. The Habsburg dynasty saw itself as the defender of Catholicism after the Reformation. That mission came at an enormous cost. Wars against the Ottoman Empire, the suppression of the Dutch Revolt, the French Wars of Religion, the 30 Years' War, all were financed with silver from the Americas. Even the infamous Spanish Armada sent against England in 1588 was built with this silver. When the Armada failed, the collapse was not just military, but financial. So where did all that gold and silver go? Into wars, ships, and debt. Spain didn't just spend what it had. It borrowed against treasure that hadn't yet arrived. German banking families like the Fuggers and Genoese financiers extended massive loans to the crown in exchange for future silver shipments. The plan was simple. The silver would arrive and the debts would be paid. But there was one fatal flaw. If the silver didn't arrive, the system collapsed. And collapse it did. Spain declared bankruptcy in 1557, 1575, 1596, and 1607. The richest empire in the world was admitting we can't pay every few decades. Into this fragile system stepped the pirates. They were not just sea raiders, they were instruments of economic warfare. England and the Netherlands understood that striking the treasure fleets meant destroying Spain's credit. The loot captured by Francis Drake was worth nearly half of England's annual revenue. In 1628, Piet Hein's capture of an entire treasure fleet plunged Spain's economy into crisis once again. Every lost ship was more than a naval defeat. It was a real-time state bankruptcy. Spain had mortgaged tomorrow's treasure to survive today. When a fleet sank, everyone went unpaid. Meanwhile, England and the Netherlands reinvested the captured silver into navies, banks, and trading companies. Spain's lifeline had become its greatest vulnerability. On maps, Spain still looked powerful, but inside, it was hollow. Inflation crushed the population, debt handed the crown over to foreign bankers, and pirates constantly battered the system. For ordinary people, wealth was an illusion. Prices kept rising, wages stagnated, and taxes only grew heavier. This story is not just about the past. In every era of easy money, the same illusion returns. Money is mistaken for wealth. But without production, efficiency, and solid capital, money slowly rots the system from within. Spain experienced this with silver. For those today who feel the same pain through inflation, this story feels all too familiar. The conclusion is clear. Treasure is not wealth. Silver is not security. Lasting power comes from production, systems, and sustainable structures. Spain failed to see this. Its rivals did, and they built the future. History doesn't repeat itself exactly, but its rhythm is always the same. The question is this: will we recognize the warning in time? If you want to change your perspective, subscribe.